Hey everyone, this is Psychedelic Actualization. Today, I'm not alone because we're going to talk about medicalization of psychedelics. And I don't know much about it. That's why I have an expert here, my friend Molly. And that's even the first interesting term, right? Who's an expert? Who's not an expert? What does all of this mean? What's the current state of all of this? I'm very curious on what's going to come up in this conversation. And I hope you get some value out of this. So, Molly, just a little introduction. Who are you? What are you doing? Why do you know stuff about medicalization?
Yeah, hi. I'm Molly. I'm a human being. And the reason that I have been termed an expert in the medicalization of psychedelics is because of being part of the genesis of one of the organizations that is looking to put psychedelics into a medical format, to translate it into a medicine as referred to or as understood by Western medicine. So basically putting psychedelics through drug development pipelines. And I ended up there because of having an interest in making it so that doctors understood psychedelics and understood what healing with psychedelics looked like, and therefore what mental illness also might look like in that context. And I had a background in pharmacology, so that led me to being a preclinical research scientist in the world of psilocybin therapy. We're in Madagascar, as you can probably tell by our heat, sweaty, mosquito-ridden bodies. And I'm just super stoked to have the opportunity to speak on your channel. This is a YouTube debut.
Yeah, check out her work. Links are in the video description. And also, she's going to be probably part of the Psychedelic Actualization school community, which has started now as a guest speaker, presentation, community, Q&A expert. So I'm also excited for this. You didn't know about this, but I decided.
I'm stoked about that because we actually met in the context of me giving a talk. And so
exciting stuff is coming. So it's interesting because my focus has always been working with psychedelics through the lens of self-actualization and self-realization. And so the big other branch is basically medicine and therapy and actually doing this healing work with psychedelics, which also is more involved in the legalization and the politics and all of these rules that are around this thing. And there's it feels like to me there's this underground thing happening, and people are working underground and doing healing work and self-actualization work with these medicines, but then there's this whole movement emerging and accelerating at these times, and what it feels like for me, right? With the medicalization and actually scientifically trying to paint a picture of what is actually happening and how these substances and molecules can help us heal and come to a better collective state of mental health. So I'm curious, just to start off, and you touched on this a little bit, what is medicalization? What is it? And then in the context of psychedelics.
In the framework of Western medicine, it's taking these compounds and making it, providing evidence that they have a benefit for people who are in a state of ill health as deemed by Western medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So it's addressing a diagnosis by reducing the symptoms or ideally curing the underlying mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the medicalization means, or putting it into a medical model. Obviously, all of this is totally through the lens of Western medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And may I tangent?
Yeah.
That the reason that I was interested in doing this is because of experiencing the Western medicine model for mental health firsthand, and psychedelics, not in the context of thinking that they were healing for mental health, but more just as being a curious young person and being oh my God, this has had a really powerful effect on me, and sort of finding them out that way as having a potential as being medicinal, and then having concerns about what the current model was doing in their attempts to heal, what that healing actually meant and looked like. So, medicalization.
Great. Yeah, that's an important point that you mentioned, I guess. There is it's always looking at terms in forms of the context or in which these terms are used. So medicalization is kind of like a term in our Western culture, probably not a term that the shamans in the Amazon use. Like, we're gonna medicalize ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Probably, maybe they are if they're concerned about the Western world, but like it's a term that emerged out of this culture and out of this recognition that you mentioned that, hey, our current models and our current treatments of some of these diagnoses that we have defined in our dictionaries and mental health like diagnosis programs and dictionaries, we could treat them more effectively with this kind of stuff, and that's not allowed. So we're going to provide evidence. Okay, great.
It also comes down to like what is sickness and what is health, and like these things are not part of the human experience in itself. I guess a lot of those plants and people who work with plants in a shamanic way might consider all of life to be a medicine or a process of healing. So it's like it's medicalization as a term suggests that it is a separate thing to life, business as usual.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, but it's like it's kind of useful because otherwise the conversation is so open that you're not gonna get anywhere, kind of. So science and the medicalization is kind of like consciously limiting itself to a certain framework to present something and like make illusionary progress towards some constructs.
Yeah, the construct of what is health and what is sickness.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, fascinating process. So how do people go about this stuff? Like
going about drug development and medicalization. So the process of drug development involves testing a compound and proving that it is effective in treating a condition. So first you've got to define what your condition is or identify a condition. We're going like all the way back to the development of the DSM-5. It's like, okay, these people are sick. And then coming up with a reason why you might think that these people are sick, or a series of symptoms that indicate that they're sick, and then proposing, like developing a hypothesis that this might help these people for these reasons, whether it's because I've got evidence that it reduces their symptoms or that it reduces the cause of their sickness. And in the framework that has developed, that is usually done in animals because you've got to, if you've got an idea that this might help this illness, you've got to really find a lot of evidence to justify putting a new drug, for example, into people. This is not necessarily how that happened with psychedelics, as you no doubt figure, in that we first did a load of studies in humans and then started looking at the mechanisms in animals. So then you go through a process of testing a small group of people to see if their diagnosis is reduced or their symptoms improve or the number of people in that cohort that still have the diagnosis is reduced after the treatment. And then that's a pieces of evidence to justify doing it in a larger group, that you show that it's safe and it's not caused any harm. Then you look to see if it's helped people in their actual condition, and then you test it in a larger group of people again, and then go to a regulatory body to say, look, I've got a treatment that is both safe and works, and in the case of mental health care, because there's like current treatments available, that it works better than what we currently are giving people. And then this comes up with the question of like, what is better? Like, what is working and what is better? And then there's this extra fun bit, which is particularly interesting for psychedelics, of how do you actually make it accessible to patients, both in terms of having facilities wherein you can deliver it, if you imagine it's a surgery or something like that. In this case, obviously, it's a therapy with psychedelics. How do you actually have the facilities to make it accessible to people? How do you make it so that people who have this condition can access it in terms of logistics and finances, which is kind of part of logistics, like making it. And then also, how do you make sure you've got enough therapists who are qualified to accompany and psychologically support this treatment? yeah, so that's it pretty much. It's like the process is, the end result of the process is to have the proof to the government that it's not dangerous, that its abuse liability is managed or like accounted for, whether it's that you've got a controlled drug or to show that there isn't an abuse liability or whatever. So like changing the scheduling, and that any safety concerns are managed as well.
Okay, great. So it sounds like to me that's the general process is like you start with an end in mind. There's like some person with some passion to work in that field and make psychedelics more accessible to the public, and then you start with that end in mind and you work backwards and you figure out all the logistics along the way.
Well, we're working backwards with psychedelics because they've been used in history as a medicine for eons. So that's the funny thing about it.
Yeah. Okay. So we're basically trying to prove something that is evident already.
Kind of.
Kind of.
Kind of.
But there's also the dangers. There's like the care in picking which kind of participants, and as you mentioned, the problem with defining health and thickness. It was funny in my journey, like before I think discovered psychedelics, around the time when I was 16, my first essay in school that I wrote was like a debunking of the DSM and why labels are not useful for humans. Now I kind of recognize the usefulness of them, and so I'm curious in your point of view, what's working well in our process of psychedelic research and the process of medicalization.
What's working well? And wow, it's so much easier to think about what's not working well.
We're going to come to that.
But that's the cognitive bias of what's working well is that psychedelics are actually bringing together people of different disciplines to work together and to think about therapy alongside a compound that can support the therapy, rather than dismissing that these two things don't interact. Like at the moment, it's that people get prescribed SSRIs and often therapy, often as a waiting for to work, see if that works before the therapy. And then it's kind of considered that because both of these things are antidepressant, i.e. reducing symptoms of depression, which is the definition of the depression anyway, that those two things are working for the same goal and therefore enhancing each other. But actually looking at how therapy and the compound interacts with each other, I think is a really amazing thing that psychedelics are doing. I'm really hopeful that it's also having us, there's an awareness of that what SSRIs are doing is very different, or antidepressants that we're currently prescribing is very different from what psychedelics are doing. And so it's calling into question what is depression, what is it caused by, and what is what is the effect of just treating the symptoms. And the fact that there is a capacity for people to have experiences in life with psychedelics, whatever, that are curative, i.e. having a long-term effect on their point of view. There's one of the massive successes in my point of view is the opportunity to look at connectedness in the context of mental health care, and the development of the Watts connectedness scale from Ross Watts, and that this scale has been developed to look at health and wellness in the context of psychedelics because of the fact that people feeling more connected with psychedelics seem to be related to their antidepressant effects of these compounds. And so ideally we can look at this scale, psychedelics are teaching us this about depression. What else is working for depression? How does this relate to connectedness? And how can we think about connectedness in life beyond just illness and healthcare and policy and stuff like that? So yeah, it's the bringing together of people from different disciplines all focusing on one topic. At least there's debate happening about the mysticism and science and whether they can work together or not. I'm sure that is an incomplete list, but it's what I have come out with here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. No, it's a great observation, and I've made a similar one when I visited these spaces of conferences and festivals. It's like there's a focused dialogue happening, and it's an interdisciplinary approach of like naturally people who are interested in psychedelics are not just interested in healing, but also naturally like the philosophical, spiritual, mystical sides are coming out, especially in the deeper realms of the psychedelic experience. It's like you can't avoid it. And I'm like, you gotta face those questions inevitably. And so the conversation is happening naturally. And even though we're still at the very kind of like baby ages of this whole movement, and just feels like it's just getting started, and it's not very accessible to the masses at this time, it still feels like just by that happening, by that dialogue happening, there's such an increase of awareness around this field. Like I don't know, like people who have never thought about like hearing about psychedelics, now in their mind it's like, oh, this is actually a positive thing. Like I was so immersed in the bubble that actually I'm now leaning towards more emphasizing the challenges and dangers, and like, oh, don't like look at it in this overly positive light, because there's a balanced approach, kind of like there's dangers and there's like hardcore experiences and that make things worse. But it's like, it's great to see this movement towards the overemphasis of the bad, to the overemphasis of the good in the minds of just like people. So that's a great awareness, and I feel like this is one of my greatest like observations of what's actually working.
Yeah, I was in a lecture by Rosalind Stone, if you know her, but she's worked in the press, and they were saying about the problem in the media about psychedelics, and the problem that they're talking about is this over-egging rather than the dismissiveness. It's almost like it's such an obvious thing that I couldn't even see it. Haha, that is, I seem to think. What psychedelics show us the really obvious things that are in our faces that we don't see, but that's the major success of the medicalization, and the whole reason that I went into or wanted to support that mission was so that it wasn't dismissed by when science and medicine has kind of formed a religion of its own, where it's like an authority, a major authority, and if it's backed by or investigated scientifically, this is a way of communicating with people that, like, where it's familiar enough to be receivable. So that's a major, major success of the whole thing, that it's at least part of the conversation. Yeah. Big.
Okay, great. And to wrap it up, kind of like, what are the biggest challenges you see, or kind of like potentials to kind of like move forward now from the standpoint of what we're on? Where are you most passionate about, or like what do you see? Where's this going? What's happening?
I think the challenge is going to be not approaching them with humility, and that like medicalization of psychedelics is doing psychedelics right. Like, okay, we're doing it in a way that's controlled. We're doing it we're working with psychedelics in a way that we know has got safeguarding, and therefore it is superior. And then, because of working, like lots of people working in this space who've got experience in medicalization or drug development or working in the mental health space, usually employing thought systems or structures or beliefs that might have actually been inherited through their education or their training, that there's going to be a dominance of that on the use of psychedelics in a way that might actually lead to harms. And so humility is a must, because ideally integrating psychedelics into mental health care completely revolutionizes how we understand mental health care rather than how we understand psychedelics. And so that could cause some friction for people who are really married to these ideologies about how, like, and feel that they, like, I feel like a real friction in their authority being challenged by the teachings that psychedelics are bringing contradicting what they've been taught and what they've been practicing, like a friction arising because a change in how we work with people, meaning that how we have worked with people being not wrong, but no longer the gold standard. So that's something that I would really like to have like zoomed out conversations on what is the actual goal here, and real integrity in anyone who's working with psychedelics, especially in a profit-making model of like, what is the profit for? Like, is the profit so that we can make this actually happen? Or is the profit because this is going to blow up? I can see this is like the new technology that's going to blow up. So how do we get involved? Like, yeah, that's a big one. I can't remember what the rest of your question was.
Yeah, it was about the challenges that you see regarding the medicalization. But that's a big point. I love that you brought in the humility and this, like, it even counteracts with the psychedelics, because they break these like models apart over and over again. It's like oftentimes when I go into journey, it's like I constructed this great model about life and reality and spirituality, and it just completely blows it out of the window every time I go into a deeper experience. So it's kind of like almost implied that it's like happening, but there is a danger of this like grandiosity and the stability and the abuse that the mind or the ego sees in this kind of
or even the splitting of people who have got feel a connection with the plants and people who haven't, for example, and like, the irony of this whole work within the world of psychedelic medicine is the amount of friction between researchers that there is. So I've been in circles where people are talking about how like their idea was robbed by someone else or things like this, and even like people. I had a conversation with a woman who's part of a Santa Daime church just before I went into the Amazon to do some research with an organization where we were taking measures of biological changes and neurological changes in people, like before and after sitting with ayahuasca. And she was enraged by this concept that it was super disrespectful to be exploring this medicine through a physical realm means. And from my point of view, it was about putting communication with people who like don't have an ability to perceive things in the way that she does. And is that there's like an anger towards different groups in this space is already indicating to me concerns about this. And especially even that if psychedelics become really widely available for use, it's got there's a massive, it's got a name like psychedelic narcissism, right? Where it's like, I am the wielder of the plants, and that's gonna bite. Like, life teaches lessons, sometimes in kind ways and sometimes in ways that are like, yo, you're out of balance. I'm gonna shift you into balance in a way that you're gonna listen to because it's gonna hurt. And to blame the plants, like, oh, the medicine didn't work for me, is something that I've heard. Oh, nothing happened with ayahuasca. Oh, ayahuasca didn't teach me anything that I don't already know. And it's like, I mean, I'm not saying that I have any superiority on this, but I realise that I have to catch myself there, because I'm like, well, actually, I think that the medicine always works. And maybe showing you that you think that you already know everything is part of its teachings. I don't know. After working in psychedelics and going and sitting in my first ceremony with ayahuasca, with this idea that I know how psychedelics work on a psychological, like in a neuropsychopharmacological way. That was the biggest thing that I came away from sitting with ayahuasca with, was like, oh, we actually really know nothing. Like, even in the way, like, even on the basics of pharmacokinetics and like how drugs are processed in the body, I was like, this does not make any sense according to the models that I've been taught. I love it.
Yeah.
Because curiosity is really important
Yeah.
But when it becomes a career, like science becomes a career, make drug development is a career, people can want to like just be good at their job in a way, like look like they're good at their job, maybe more than like the integrity is just key.
Great. So that just highlights like such a small portion of the challenges of what is happening, of that great thing and that great movement that is happening. And and it highlights the nature of like our human mind, of perspective, of relativism. All these questions, they just flow into this whole conversation. And then it goes much deeper with what you kind of touched on a little bit of like, how do we respect the indigenous wisdom? How, like, there's a whole new conversation happening about the environmental concerns. If it's gonna get popular, how are we gonna grow enough ayahuasca vine? Peyote extinction, like all of these things are gonna be coming up, and it's starting to come up in those conversations. And there's many more challenges that come in this process of evolution that is happening. Which we're gonna go into in another conversation, not today. But to wrap this up, I would love to ask you just like, what do you want to leave the viewer with? What has been your like biggest insight or lesson or learning in working in this field of medicalization and being immersed in this culture?
Why do you want to understand? Is a question that I ask myself often, because I want to understand things a lot. And how often does that desire to understand lead to shortcutting of true understanding? Like, we've had little nuggets of tidbits of how psychedelics might be working. And now I see headlines that are like, psychedelics promote plasticity. And so now we're going to develop a non-psychedelic psychedelic that promotes plasticity. And it's like we're jumping the gun because we're so thirsty to understand things. And just like everyone's experience is different in life. And everyone's reason why is different. And, listen. I don't know if that's really... I'm saying this to my future self. Maybe listen more, speak less. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. If you want to talk to Molly, come join our Psychedelic Actualization School community. And we have many great conversations over there around all kinds about psychedelic actualization. This is going to be exciting. And otherwise there's another link to Molly's work, and there's another link to Talking to Me 101, really if you're curious about coaching. And there's another link regarding a free integration workbook if you're curious about this. Many links, maybe way too many to I don't know, they're accumulating. I think this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Molly. And we could have gone way deeper.
Yeah,
and we will be in another video. So stay tuned for that. Because
everything is both true and not true.
Yeah.
So it's you can go around in circles.
It's funny to use language and models and constructs to explore these like deep realms of the psychedelic space. And it's fascinating and my greatest passion. So I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much, Molly.
Thank you.